This is stunning. This is absolutely stunning, man. When it comes to the stock market and what's going on and how long this might go on. Um, on February the 12th, the Dow Jones Industrial Average finished at 29,551. 551, right? So that was the all-time high mark. You know, people were still boasting about the economy. Our president was boasting about the economy, even though there were signs that we were about to go into a recession. And just 5 weeks later, the Dow Jones Industrial Average has dropped 34%. 34%. Um, Now, why is this? Me personally, I'm no financial expert. I'm just a guy that likes to read certain things, like to read a lot. To me, I think what's going on is two things. I think that we're already in what would be a mild to moderate recession. But what's complicating it is the situation going on now with the pandemic. That's adding more stress to the economy, more uncertainty. You know what I'm saying? More anxiety. And these are things that are driving the market down to the point where literally, even though they're not really using this word a lot, we're suffering from uh, a stock market crash. Okay. This is different from the 1987 crash where it was a 1 day thing. All right. This has been ongoing since mid-February, but in particular the last week. 4 times they had to temporarily halt trading because of fear that the market was just going to totally slide way out of control. 4 times in a week. Um, I mean, it's crazy. Like today, the market is going to most likely fall. The Dow Industrial Average is going to fall below 20,000 for the first time since 2017. And today, if it stays where it is now, last time I looked at the Dow was down over 2,000 points. If it stays right there, that will essentially wipe out all the gains made since Trump took office. So we were like pretty much reset right back to 2017. You know, how low can it get? I don't know. Um, but I know one thing: a lot of what's going on mirrors 1929 and not 2000, 2008. 2008, which was the Great Recession, it was a slower process. It was more like that was more like that was more of a damage of attrition. You know what I'm saying? That was more like older Ali just peppering you to death. What's going on now is more like Mike Tyson. You know what I'm saying? It's body blows followed with uppercut and just pulverizing the market, inside. You know what I'm saying? As far as like, I'm using boxing metaphor. Like basically, it's just an ass kicking in a short period of time. And it kind of really does mirror 1929. Like I've been reading about 1929 a lot lately. And 1929, the market peaked in September, right? Although there were signs that things were volatile, right? And that the market was kind of overflated, the value. The experts, the so-called experts at the time, paid no attention to these problems. Why should they? The market had been rising ever since the market began roaring in the early 20s. And ultimately, in October, the market had a series of days where it kept losing a lot of value. It had days where there was these crashes where the market would lose 8% of its value, 10% of its value, 8% of its value. So like what's going on now. Then ultimately, you had that one day where it lost like 13% of its value, which triggered, in hindsight, the beginning of the Great Depression. It was a global thing. The London market had crashed, I think, like a week prior to American stock market crash. And then the market just kept going down and down and down and down and down, all the way to the point where by January of 1930, the market had lost 89% of its value. 89% of its value. Um, the only thing that keeps us from being in that dire situation is that we now have more safeguards to prevent a long, drawn-out depression, which occurred during the 1930s, throughout the entire 1930s into the 1940s. The only thing that really got us truly out of the Great Depression was World War II. I mean, Roosevelt's programs helped, but the economy didn't really get going until World War II. And another thing I read that was interesting is that high point in the stock market in 1929 wasn't reached again in the United States until 1954. So it took 25 years for the stock market to get back to that level. So my thing is, I think this is a recession that unfortunately is also coinciding with this pandemic. And the fact that they think that this thing is going to be around until at least June, July, and here we are in March. It's not looking good as far as the markets, man. Um, One thing I know about the stock market crash in 1929 is that it instantly turned people who were millionaires into paupers. They were poor. They lost everything. You had people that were jumping out of the windows. You know what I'm saying? Because they couldn't deal with having lost their wealth. They didn't see any value in life other than their wealth and their material possessions. And one thing I'll say about that in connection to what's going on now is that I'm seeing a lot of people doing a lot of complaining about a lot of stupid shit. You know, a lot of people complaining about not being able to go to the malls and not being able to do this and do that, and not being able to, you know, watch sports, which is one of the chief things I'm seeing. You know, I want my NBA. I want to watch baseball, and I'm like, look, man. Um, Sometimes, you know, I'm not saying that any situation like this is a good thing. It's not. But I think sometimes some people get too coddled. They don't really know how good they got it. Americans, when you compare our lifestyle to other countries around the world, we really have it good. Even though we do a lot of complaining, I do too. We really have it good. And, you know, it can always be worse. Um, that's all I'm saying. It could always be worse. I was reading about the influenza pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, 1919, right? And I want to end this video about people keep talking about the low mortality rate. Now, when you look at reported deaths with reported cases of this strain, right, of the disease, of the virus, right now it has a mortality rate of about 1.7%. Okay, which, no, on the surface, that's not that high, right? But the thing you have to worry about, like I said, not the generally young, strong, healthy people out there. You got to worry about those in our society who are most at risk. And that's the people who are the elderly and those who have underlying health conditions. Those are the ones you have to worry about. And what troubles me are all the people who are walking around like Kevin Durant, like perhaps Eldris Elba, and some of these other individuals who may not feel that ill, or have no symptoms at all, and they don't even know they have the virus, and they can potentially spread it to those who are susceptible to uh, more severe consequences. Take this for example. In the 1919 influenza pandemic, right? A third of the United States population, a third, contracted that flu. 30 million Americans were infected. Of the 30 million, 675,000, or more than half a million, died. Now, when you look at the raw numbers, like, wow, that killed a half a million people? But that's a death rate of 2%. So that means that 29 million and 300,000 did not pass away. But that still means that almost a quarter million people lost their lives. So when you take that mortality rate in context, yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot of people. But when you look at how flu affects everybody every year, like throughout the country, between 10 and 45 million people every year contract the flu. We don't think about it that much. You see what I'm saying? We don't think about it every year, about how far ranging the flu is in our country and how many people are affected by it. It's just that the milder strain doesn't really pose the threat that this strain would. This strain is much more severe. So that's something to just think about in this video. You know what I'm saying? And the two things are connected, the stock market and what's going on now. And I just hope that this situation gets resolved quickly so that we don't get into a prolonged situation, because we don't want to get into a situation like we were in with the Great Depression. I'm just going to put it to you like this. Most people aren't built to deal with that. Most people in this country, as coddled as we are now, people who aren't very resourceful, people who are soft, you don't want to be in a situation where you were back in the 1930s, where you had people who were homeless and had to literally build shelters and to live, and people who were committing suicide in mass numbers because they lost their fortune, because all they know is their money. You had people that had to resort to crime. Matter of fact, you had people who were glorified, like bank robbers and shit like that, because the shit had gotten so bad. You know what I'm saying? People got angry because it was still these banks that had money, but they wouldn't give you loans and all this type of stuff, whatever. You know what I'm saying? So, and as bad as it was for everybody, it was even worse for black people. At one point, man, the unemployment rate back then was at 23% nationally. So what do you think the unemployment rate for black people was? Probably like 90%. That's how bad it got. That's why people had to resort to doing illegal shit back then. You know what I'm saying? So that's how bad it got back during the 1930s. And it got so bad that a man who was branded a socialist was elected in a landslide. FDR. FDR went on to become one of the top 3 presidents of all time, even though he was branded a socialist, even by some people in his own party back then. And it's funny how, as shit is getting bad now, people are touting Trump for proposing mailing every American $1,000 check right now. Right? People are loving that idea. But it's funny because these same people 3 weeks ago called Bernie Sanders, a socialist. These same people called Andrew Yang, who proposed something similar, a socialist. Now, when the shit hits the fan, now you want that socialism. Now you want your government to give you handouts. Now you want this universal health care. That's what I'm talking about, you know what I'm saying, with Americans, man. They're full of shit. But I hate to end that video on that note. Tell me what you guys think.